Welcome to the Meteor Instructional Best Practices webinar series. Meteor Education is a leading educational services partner working with education providers to help them create high-impact learning experiences. As one of the largest providers of learning spaces, including furnishings and interior design services, Meteor's focus is the integration of best practices for teaching and learning to drive inquiry-based instruction, effective use of modern classrooms, and increase student achievement. Today we are going to explore rigor in literacy. Did you know that rigor comes from what students do? It's the student action in the classroom. Rigor is one of those educational words that has many definitions as educators defining it. For some educators, it's about providing hard tasks for students to complete. For other educators, it's about the quantity of tasks, the more the better. But in reality, rigor is the learning experiences that challenge students' thinking in a new and interesting way. Rigor is about what students do and is individual to each student's needs. As you can see here, Meteor defines rigor as one of the key principles for high-impact learning experiences. The deliberate actions that are necessary for the types of learning experiences are also aligned to the research of John Hattie's visible learning. We know that John Hattie's research resulted in specific indicators for success as noted here. If we take a look at what his work cites as having a direct impact on student achievement at a 0.4 or above, we notice the following connect directly to rigorous learning experiences. They would be teacher expectations of students, depth of conceptual knowledge, complex task analysis, and academic discussions. So let's spend some time discussing what the teacher action would be, what the teacher does to create an environment for rigor, and what the student action would be, what the student does to find success with a rigorous task. But first, what do you think? Take a minute and jot down words or phrases that come to mind when you think of rigor. What are you looking for in the classroom as evidence of rigor? If you're watching this video with your colleagues, you can stop it now and take some time to discuss your thoughts to determine if you are looking for the same types of evidence. Also, you may want to return to this at the end of this webinar to see if you would add look-fors to your list based on your new learning. So this is how we define rigor. Rigor equals complexity plus difficulty. Complexity is the constant. In other words, it stays the same and never changes. Difficulty is the variable. It does change, and the teacher can support the student through best instructional practices. Let's break this down even further. Complexity, the constant, is the depth of knowledge level of the standard and/or the level of thinking that is required by the student to show proficiency. And difficulty, which is the variable, is about the individual student and meeting that student's needs. It is the skills and tools that each individual student brings to the task. The teacher can support students with various strategies, including addressing various learning styles and scaffolding learning experiences. The key here is that as educators, we must look at each individual student and stretch each student. So let's go back to the first half of the equation. Complexity, the constant. That is the depth of knowledge levels. These are the 4 depth of knowledge levels. Level 1 is recall and reproduction. Level 2 is application of concepts and skills. That's book knowledge or being able to follow a procedure. Level 3 is strategic thinking. That's an original idea where students are uncovering information. And a level 4 is extended thinking. This might be a research application to something students have never seen before. Educators need to understand these levels when creating learning experiences for students in order to create tasks or experience for students at the correct cognitive depth. In other words, what is the level of student thinking that is required? And most state standards outline the complexity or depth of knowledge level, so it's not a guessing game for the teacher when it comes to what a level of a task should be. As I said before, the second part of the equation is difficulty. That's the variable. It is important that teachers provide experiences for students that have an element of difficulty. For example, if a task is too easy, it really is only practice for that student. If a task is too hard, then most students will either shut down or just give up. Each learning experience for students needs to have just enough difficulty for a student so they are able to persevere to complete it. What makes something difficult for a student? There could be several factors such as reading and comprehension, lack of experiences, or lack of basic mathematics skills. Since our topic is rigor and literacy, let's spend some time talking about reading and comprehension and how this is a factor that can make a task difficult for many students. We know that college and career reading requires an increase in reading levels, anywhere from 2 to 3 grade levels, as students are expected to read more nonfiction and technical reading, which you find in the content areas of science, social studies, and history. We also know that within each of these content areas, there is domain-specific vocabulary that can become like a foreign language for our students. This has resulted in content often being more difficult for students. If the expectation is to get students to the high end of the Lexile band by the end of each school year, educators need to know the reading level of students. One strategy might be to break the Lexile band into quarters and set small targets along the way for each student based on their individual difficulty level by breaking this chart down into more manageable chunks. Here is a breakdown by quarters that you can use as a guide and monitoring tool. You may notice that some grade levels start off with a lower Lexile level the first quarter than what was the expected level at the end of the previous school year. This is due to summer slippage. Research shows that over the summer, students lose a minimum of 2 to 3 months of learning. For example, when you look at the 5th grade, the Lexile range is 830 to 1010. However, the target for the first quarter is 800. Notice that it starts a little lower than the level that students ended in the 4th grade, which was 940. Once again, this is under the assumption of summer slippage. So how do you use this information and quarterly targets to select the right text for your students based on their individual level of difficulty? First, you would find a student's grade level and the quarterly targets for the year. So by the end of the first quarter in 5th grade, you will want to make sure that students are able to read a text at the 800 Lexile level. This is considered the at-level text. By the end of the 2nd quarter, students in 5th grade should be able to read at-level text at the 870 Lexile level. 940 is the at-level text by the end of the 3rd quarter. And finally, by the end of the school year, we would want our students in 5th grade to be able to read independently and proficiently at the 1010 Lexile level. As you use the tool for progressive difficulty to help students that may have difficulty with reading and comprehension, you need to consider the 3 types of text levels that you will want to provide for your students as you scaffold for each student based on their own difficulty levels. Here are the 3 types of text. Stretch text, which requires direct instruction. At-level text, which requires coaching from the teacher and student individual practice. And again, this is the Lexile reading level provided at each quarter on the Lexile chart. And finally, fluency text. This is the area in which student choice is critical. Since stretch text requires direct instruction, it is very appropriate and a must for small fluid groups. Stretch text will be a challenge for many students and above their reading levels, so teachers will need to model and in some cases read the text aloud as they build vocabulary and comprehension skills. The key is all students need exposure to stretch text in order to progress along the Lexile chart. There may be times when you will select at-level text for your students. You would want to provide some text at that level so that students are able to read with coaching and guidance. This may not be a stretch text for students, but they still require the support of the teacher. And lastly, fluency text is the actual reading level that your students are comfortable reading. It may be lower or higher than the expected range for your grade level depending on each individual student. So the implications for you include the following as the educator. You will want to make sure that you are selecting text at each of the text levels, stretch, at-level, and fluency, for each unit of study. You will need to keep in mind that for some students, the Lexile level for each quarter may be their stretch level, and therefore you can use this information for your fluid grouping. And finally, you will want to include reading time for students every day to help to create the love for reading. And this should be at their fluency level or possibly above that if they are self-selecting. Self-selection or choice is a strong motivator. Overall, it's important that for reading to be rigorous for students, that the appropriate materials at the correct levels are chosen based on each individual student's level of difficulty and ability to read. Again, there needs to be an element of difficulty for students to persevere. Fluency text is great for practice, and stretch text works well for students as they build their vocabulary and comprehension knowledge. Since we know that nonfiction is an important part of college and career readiness with the intentionality of the progression of difficulty, looking at stretch, at-level, and fluency levels, then a big motivator for students is that of choice in selection of text. Keep it in mind it's not about the content of the text, but the skills being taught. Then student choice is key and a strong motivator for learning. This has huge implications for our classroom libraries and media centers. Since the Center for College and Career Readiness is a training and research organization, we have done some analysis on media centers and the selection of books. Here's an example of an elementary school and the analysis of their media center. Specifically, we were asked to look at 5th grade at this school and the availability of books for them in the media center. At this school, the 5th grade students' reading levels by Lexile bands range from 450 to 1,000, as you can see here. As you can see, the data shows that 90% of the 5th graders were reading below or at the low level of the Lexile band. However, when you look at what is available in the media center for these students, you notice that the majority of books were literature. This information was very valuable for this particular school because it allowed them to do a deep dive to see what was available for their students. You may want to take a look at the books available for your students in your media center as well as those you have in your classroom library. The key is to have a variety of text at all levels so that all students, no matter what level of difficulty they have, can be exposed to text at all 3 levels. So in conclusion, rigor equals complexity plus difficulty. Complexity is the depth of knowledge level of the task, it is the constant, and it is set by the standards. And difficulty is the variable, and it's based on the individual students. And in literacy, what makes something difficult for many students is the inability to read text independently and proficiently within their grade level Lexile band. Rigor is about what students do and is individual to each student's needs. Creating rich learning experiences for all students will be based on the complexity of the task as well as the individual difficulty. You will want to make sure those learning experiences challenge each student's thinking in a new and interesting way. Here are some questions for you and or your team to discuss based on this short webinar. How deliberate is your school or classroom with the following? Changing text range over the school year, including various types of text, exposing students to a variety of text. What process do you use to choose fluency, at-level, and stretch text for your students? What does that look like across all content areas? Additional resources are also available on this topic in your folder. This webinar series is brought to you by Meteor Education and the Center for College and Career Readiness. For more information about how Meteor Education can help you develop high-impact learning experiences, go to meteoreducation.com.